The reunion hall was a sight to behold, draped in elegant decorations and buzzing with laughter and conversation. Former classmates, now older and dressed in their finest, mingled around the lavish buffet tables. The air was filled with the clinking of glasses and murmurs of nostalgia as people shared stories of their school days, their achievements, and their lives since graduation. But as the grand double doors swung open, the room fell into a stunned silence. A man stepped in, his tailored suit exuding sophistication, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor with every step. He walked with quiet confidence, the kind of poise that demanded attention without needing to ask for it. His face was familiar yet transformed, sharp, handsome features framed by the wisdom of years and the polish of success. Those who recognized him were left speechless, their expressions a mix of disbelief and curiosity. "Is that?" someone whispered. "Yes, it's him," another replied, their voice tinged with awe. It was impossible to reconcile the man standing before them with the boy they had once known. This was no ordinary return. This was the kind of entrance that stories were made of, the sort of moment that people would recount for years to come. He made his way through the crowd, a faint smile playing on his lips, as if he was fully aware of the stir he was causing but chose not to acknowledge it. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the faces of those who had once been his tormentors, his indifferent classmates, and the rare few who had shown him kindness. A wave of memory swept over him, but he maintained his composure, the smile never faltering. As he moved further into the room, whispers grew louder, and the story started spilling out in hushed tones. "Can you believe it? That's Daniel. The kid who used to come to school with holes in his shoes. The same Daniel we laughed at for bringing those weird, hand-stitched notebooks. No way. I heard he became some big-shot entrepreneur. But how?" The man, Daniel, finally stopped near a group of his former classmates. Their expressions ranged from warm and welcoming to sheepish and uncomfortable. Among them was Jason, the ringleader of the group that had tormented him the most during school. Jason's confident demeanor faltered as Daniel turned to him, their eyes meeting for the first time in years. "Jason," Daniel said, his voice calm but carrying an undertone of something unspoken. Jason fumbled for words, his usual bravado replaced by awkward laughter. "Daniel. Wow, look at you. Long time, huh?" Daniel nodded, his smile never quite reaching his eyes. "It has been a long time." The tension between them was palpable, drawing the attention of others nearby. The room seemed to collectively hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. But Daniel didn't linger. He excused himself with a polite nod and moved on, leaving Jason and the others in his wake, still grappling with the weight of his presence. As Daniel continued to circulate, snippets of conversations reached his ears, fragments of the life he had left behind. He overheard a woman recalling the time he had been humiliated in front of the entire class because he couldn't afford the required textbooks. Another recounted the cruel prank that Jason and his friends had pulled on him during a school event. Each memory brought a sharp pang of pain, but it was fleeting. He wasn't the same person anymore. Despite the whispers, Daniel greeted everyone with warmth and grace, engaging in polite conversations and deflecting questions about his success with humility. He avoided boasting or seeking validation, letting his presence speak for itself. But beneath his calm exterior, a storm of emotions brewed. As the evening wore on, a microphone was handed to the evening's MC, who invited everyone to share memories or words of reflection. A few people spoke, recounting light-hearted stories or expressing gratitude for the chance to reconnect. When Daniel's name was called, the room erupted in applause, a mixture of genuine admiration and performative enthusiasm. He walked to the stage, the weight of countless eyes on him. For a moment, he stood in silence, surveying the crowd. His expression softened as he began to speak. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady and calm. "It's surreal to be back here, in this room, with all of you. I'll admit, I hesitated when I received the invitation. School wasn't the easiest time for me, as many of you might remember. A ripple of uncomfortable murmurs spread through the audience. Some shifted in their seats, while others avoided his gaze. But I realized something, Daniel continued. This school, these experiences, they shaped me. Every challenge, every unkind word, every obstacle, it all became the fuel that drove me to where I am today. So, in a way, I owe you all my thanks. The room was silent, his words hanging heavy in the air. Daniel's gaze swept across the faces of his former classmates, some of whom now looked visibly uncomfortable. But then, he smiled, a genuine, warm smile that seemed to dissolve the tension. Tonight isn't about the past, he said. It's about celebrating how far we've all come. Life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it? The crowd erupted into applause, the mood shifting to one of admiration and respect. As Daniel stepped down from the stage, he was met with handshakes, pats on the back, and words of praise. But as the evening continued, one question lingered in the minds of everyone in the room: what had happened to Daniel after all those years? What had turned the boy they had once dismissed into the man who now commanded the room? And perhaps more importantly, what would he do now that he was back? Daniel's life had begun in the shadow of a world that didn't seem to notice him. Born into a family that lived paycheck to paycheck, his childhood was a relentless cycle of sacrifices and compromises. His father worked long hours as a mechanic, while his mother juggled part-time jobs to keep food on the table. The small house they lived in was old but lovingly maintained, its peeling paint and sagging porch a testament to years of wear and tear. Yet, within its walls, there was love, a love that tried to shield Daniel from the harshness of their reality but couldn't completely erase it. At school, Daniel's struggles became evident. While other kids flaunted new backpacks and shiny sneakers, Daniel carried his books in a worn-out satchel and wore shoes that had been patched up more times than he could count. It wasn't long before the other children noticed the differences. Kids can be cruel, and Daniel became an easy target. The taunt started small, a snide remark here, a giggle there, but soon escalated into full-blown ridicule. "Hey, Daniel," one boy jeered during recess, holding up a frayed piece of paper. "Is this your report card? Looks like your family can't even afford real notebooks." The laughter stung more than the words ever could. Daniel clenched his fists but said nothing. He had learned early on that reacting only made things worse. Instead, he retreated into himself, finding solace in his dreams of a better future. Despite the bullying, Daniel was a bright and curious child. He excelled in his studies, driven by an innate hunger to learn and escape the life he had been born into. His teachers often praised his intelligence, though their words of encouragement rarely reached beyond the classroom. Outside those walls, Daniel was just the poor kid, and no amount of academic success seemed to change that perception. One incident, however, marked a turning point in Daniel's life. It was during a school assembly, an event meant to celebrate the achievements of students. Daniel had been called up to the stage to receive an award for academic excellence. A rare moment of recognition in a sea of obscurity. As he walked up, the hall filled with whispers. "Why him?" someone muttered. "He probably cheated," another voice added. As Daniel stood on stage, holding the certificate with trembling hands, a boy from the audience shouted, "Careful, Daniel. Don't let that paper get dirty. It's worth more than your house." The hall erupted into laughter, the sound echoing in Daniel's ears like a cruel symphony. He stood frozen, the certificate crumpling slightly in his grip. His gaze shifted to the principal, who offered a weak smile but said nothing to quell the laughter. No one did. In that moment, Daniel felt smaller than he ever had before. That evening, he sat on the steps of his porch, the certificate lying beside him. His father joined him, wiping grease-stained hands on a rag. "Rough day?" his father asked, his voice heavy with understanding. Daniel nodded, unable to find the words to describe the humiliation he had endured. His father sighed and placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. People will always try to make you feel less than them, son. But remember, their words don't define you. What you do next, that's what matters. Those words stayed with Daniel, embedding themselves in his heart like a seed waiting to grow. He began to channel his pain into determination, spending hours studying by the dim light of a single bulb in his room. But as much as he wanted to prove himself, life had other plans. When Daniel was 14, his mother fell ill. The medical bills piled up quickly, and his father's income was no longer enough to keep them afloat. One evening, Daniel overheard his parents arguing in hushed tones, their voices laced with worry. "We can't keep going like this," his mother said, her voice cracking. "I'll take on more shifts," his father replied. "We'll figure it out." Daniel knew then that he had to step up. The next morning, he approached his father with a resolve that belied his age. "Dad," he said, "I'm leaving school. I'll find a job and help out." His father stared at him, a mix of pride and sorrow in his eyes. "You're too young for this, Daniel. Your education is important." "But so is our family," Daniel insisted. Reluctantly, his father agreed, and Daniel's life took a drastic turn. He found work at a local shop, running errands and cleaning floors. It was grueling, thankless work, but Daniel didn't complain. Every penny he earned went toward his mother's treatment and the household expenses. Yet, even in the face of hardship, Daniel's dreams refused to die. Late at night, after his family had gone to bed, he would sit by the window, staring out at the stars and imagining a different life. He devoured books borrowed from the local library, teaching himself everything from business principles to basic coding. One fateful day, while delivering groceries, Daniel overheard a conversation that would change his life. Two men were discussing a new business venture and lamenting their need for someone young and driven to help with the groundwork. Intrigued, Daniel mustered the courage to approach them. "Excuse me," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I couldn't help but overhear. I'm hardworking and eager to learn. If you need someone, I'd like to help." The men exchanged skeptical glances but eventually agreed to give him a chance. It was the break Daniel had been waiting for, though he couldn't have known then just how far it would take him. His journey was just beginning, but the road ahead was fraught with challenges, betrayals, and moments of doubt. Yet, through it all, Daniel carried with him the memory of that school assembly, the laughter that had once crushed him now fueling his resolve to rise above it all. The boy who had once been mocked and belittled was slowly transforming into something greater, though the path to his transformation was far from easy. Daniel's first day working for the two men was nothing short of intimidating. The office wasn't much, a cramped space with old furniture and stacks of paper everywhere, but to Daniel, it felt like stepping into a whole new world. He was tasked with menial jobs at first, organizing files, running errands, and making coffee. But he paid close attention to everything happening around him. He listened to conversations about investments, product launches, and marketing strategies, absorbing every detail like a sponge. In the evenings, after finishing his tasks, he would ask questions. Sometimes, the men would indulge him with short answers, other times, they would wave him off, too preoccupied to explain. But Daniel didn't let that discourage him. Instead, he stayed late, studying the documents they left scattered on desks, trying to make sense of the complex numbers and jargon. It wasn't long before his hard work and curiosity caught the attention of one of the men, Mr. Carter, the younger and more approachable of the two. One evening, as Daniel was cleaning up the office, Mr. Carter walked in and found him poring over a spreadsheet. "You're still here?" Carter asked, raising an eyebrow. Daniel looked up, startled. "Sorry, sir. I was just trying to understand how this works." Carter studied him for a moment before pulling up a chair. "All right, let me show you. But don't tell my partner, I'm supposed to be the tough one," he joked, winking. That night, Carter explained the basics of budgeting, profit margins, and growth strategies. It was the first time anyone had taken the time to teach Daniel something beyond the scope of his job. From that point on, Carter became an unofficial mentor, assigning Daniel small tasks that required critical thinking and problem-solving. But not everyone was as supportive. The other partner, Mr. Grayson, was skeptical of Daniel's involvement. To him, Daniel was just a poor kid with no formal education, a liability at best. Grayson often dismissed Daniel's suggestions, and his condescending attitude made it clear he didn't believe Daniel belonged in their world. One day, an opportunity arose that would test Daniel's resolve. The company was working on a proposal for a major client, a deal that could secure their future. Grayson was leading the effort, but his approach was outdated and uninspired. Daniel, who had been quietly observing, noticed several flaws in the plan. After much internal debate, Daniel decided to take a risk. Late one night, he stayed in the office, reworking the proposal with the ideas he believed would make it stand out. He didn't sleep, meticulously crafting a presentation that he hoped would prove his worth. The next morning, he nervously approached Carter with his version of the proposal. "I know it's not my place, but I think this might work better," he said, handing over the document. Carter skimmed through it, his eyes widening as he realized the depth of Daniel's understanding. "Then let me pitch it to him," Daniel said, surprising even himself with his boldness. Carter hesitated but eventually agreed. That afternoon, Daniel stood before Grayson, the client, and a room full of skeptical faces. His heart pounded as he began his presentation, but he spoke with a quiet confidence that came from his thorough preparation. He explained his ideas clearly and passionately, highlighting how they addressed the client's needs and offered innovative solutions. When he finished, there was a tense silence. Then the client broke into a smile. "This is exactly what we were looking for," he said. "Let's move forward with this plan." Daniel's proposal not only secured the deal but also marked a turning point in his career. Carter was thrilled, while Grayson, though reluctant, couldn't deny Daniel's contribution. From that moment on, Daniel was no longer seen as just an errand boy. He became an integral part of the team, earning respect and trust through his hard work and ingenuity. However, success didn't come without challenges. As the company grew, so did the stakes. Daniel faced numerous obstacles, including a betrayal from a colleague who tried to take credit for one of his ideas. It was a painful experience, but Daniel learned from it, becoming more cautious and strategic in his dealings. Over the next few years, Daniel's role in the company expanded. He became known for his ability to spot opportunities and turn challenges into successes. When Carter decided to start a new venture, he offered Daniel a partnership, recognizing his potential. Together, they built a business that thrived, even in the face of economic downturns. But Daniel's rise wasn't just about financial success. Along the way, he made it a point to support others who, like him, had faced adversity. He mentored young people from underprivileged backgrounds, offering them opportunities to learn and grow. He donated to schools and community programs, determined to make a difference in the lives of those who needed it most. Through it all, Daniel never forgot where he came from. The memory of his school days, the humiliation he endured, and the resilience it took to overcome it all remained with him. It was that memory that fueled his drive to succeed, not for revenge, but to prove to himself that he was more than the labels others had placed on him. And so, as he stood in the reunion hall, surrounded by the people who had once doubted him, Daniel felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. He had taken the life he was given and turned it into something extraordinary. But his journey was far from over. There were still challenges to face, lessons to learn, and dreams to chase. Little did anyone in the room know, Daniel's story was only beginning. As the reunion continued, Daniel found himself drawn to a quiet corner of the hall, away from the clusters of people exchanging pleasantries and reminiscing about old times. He leaned against the wall, his gaze sweeping over the room. Laughter and chatter filled the space, but Daniel's mind wandered to the many paths his life could have taken. If he hadn't taken that leap of faith with Carter, if he hadn't poured his energy into learning and persevering, would he still be the same timid boy they had once mocked? He was pulled from his thoughts by a voice behind him. Daniel. Turning, he saw a woman he recognized instantly. Sarah. She had been one of the few people in school who had ever shown him kindness. Sarah had never joined in the taunting or turned a blind eye when others did. She had been different, standing out for her compassion and quiet strength. I wondered if I'd get a chance to talk to you, she said, smiling warmly. Daniel returned her smile, genuine and unguarded. It's good to see you, Sarah. It's been a long time. They found a quieter spot to sit, and for the next hour, they caught up on each other's lives. Sarah had become a teacher, dedicating her career to helping children who struggled with the same challenges Daniel had faced. She spoke passionately about her work, her eyes lighting up as she described the joy of making a difference. I remember how hard it was for you in school, she said gently. But seeing you now. I'm so proud of you, Daniel. Her words struck a chord deep within him. For years, Daniel had focused on achieving success, driven by a desire to prove himself to the world. But sitting there with Sarah, he realized that what truly mattered wasn't how others saw him but how far he had come in his own eyes. Their conversation was interrupted when Jason approached them, his face a mixture of hesitation and discomfort. Daniel stiffened slightly, memories of Jason's cruelty flashing through his mind. But he forced himself to remain composed. Hey, Daniel, Jason began, his voice lacking its usual bravado. Can we talk? Sarah glanced at Daniel, silently asking if he was okay. He nodded and stood, following Jason to another part of the room. The atmosphere between them was tense, heavy with unspoken history. I wanted to say, Jason hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. I wanted to apologize. For everything. The way I treated you back then, it was wrong. I was a stupid kid trying to impress others, and I didn't think about how it might affect you. I'm sorry. Daniel studied Jason for a long moment, searching for any hint of insincerity. What he saw was a man burdened by guilt, genuinely seeking redemption. I appreciate that, Daniel said finally, his voice calm but firm. It took me a long time to get past those days, Jason. What you did hurt me more than you'll ever know. But holding on to anger doesn't help anyone. I've moved on, and I hope you have too. Jason nodded, relief washing over his face. Thank you. And for what it's worth, you've done amazing things with your life. You're an inspiration. As Jason walked away, Daniel felt an unexpected sense of closure. Forgiving Jason didn't erase the pain of the past, but it lifted a weight he hadn't realized he was still carrying. The evening wore on, and Daniel found himself at the center of attention as people asked about his journey. At first, he felt hesitant to share too much, worried it might come across as bragging. But then he remembered the countless times he had drawn inspiration from the stories of others. If his experiences could inspire even one person in the room, it would be worth it. He spoke about his struggles, his failures, and the moments when giving up seemed like the easiest option. He shared how he had built his business, not by luck but through relentless effort and a willingness to learn. He talked about the people who had helped him along the way, emphasizing the importance of kindness and mentorship. But Daniel also spoke of his regrets, the times he had been so focused on success that he had neglected the relationships and moments that truly mattered. No amount of money or recognition can replace the time you lose, he said, his voice carrying a note of wistfulness. Make sure you're building a life, not just a career. The room fell silent, his words resonating deeply with the audience. For many, it was a moment of reflection, a chance to reevaluate their own priorities. As the reunion came to an end, Daniel found himself flooded with emotions. He had arrived unsure of what to expect, bracing for judgment or resentment. Instead, he had found closure, reconciliation, and a renewed sense of purpose. Walking out into the cool night air, Daniel paused to look back at the brightly lit hall. For years, it had symbolized pain and rejection, a reminder of all the things he had tried to leave behind. But now, it felt like just another chapter in his story, a chapter that had shaped him but no longer defined him. He smiled to himself, feeling lighter than he had in years. The boy who had once been humiliated and dismissed was gone. In his place stood a man who had faced life's challenges head-on and emerged stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next. In the weeks following the reunion, Daniel couldn't shake the memories it had stirred. Old faces, familiar voices, and the raw emotions of revisiting his past played in his mind like a film on repeat. But rather than let those memories weigh him down, he used them as a catalyst for reflection. He realized that while he had achieved incredible success, there were still gaps in his life that needed filling, personal connections he'd neglected, dreams he'd deferred, and ways he could give back more meaningfully. One evening, as he sat in his sleek, modern office overlooking the city, Daniel found himself drawn to an old photo album he had tucked away in his desk. It was filled with images from his childhood, his parents standing proudly beside their rundown house, a younger Daniel holding a battered notebook, and candid snapshots of the little moments that made up his early years. The pages were worn, the photos faded, but they carried a weight of nostalgia that was both comforting and bittersweet. He picked up his phone and dialed Carter. Though they were still partners, their conversations had become more infrequent as they juggled the demands of their thriving business. Carter answered on the second ring, his familiar voice warm and steady. "Daniel, this is a surprise," Carter said. "Everything okay?" "I was just thinking," Daniel began, choosing his words carefully. "We've done well, better than we ever imagined. But I feel like there's more we can do. Something bigger than ourselves." Carter paused, then chuckled lightly. "You've always been the dreamer, Daniel. What do you have in mind?" "I want to create something for people like us," Daniel said. "For the kids who are overlooked, underestimated, and written off. A foundation, maybe. Something that offers scholarships, mentorships, and opportunities to those who need them most." The line went quiet for a moment before Carter replied, his voice filled with admiration. "I think that's a brilliant idea. Let's make it happen." With Carter's support, Daniel threw himself into the project. He reached out to schools, community leaders, and other successful entrepreneurs, sharing his vision for the foundation. The response was overwhelming. People were inspired by his story and eager to contribute, not just financially but also through their time and expertise. The foundation, aptly named the Rising Star Initiative, launched within a year. Its mission was simple: to empower underprivileged youth with the tools they needed to succeed. The program offered workshops on financial literacy, internships in various industries, and even emotional support for those struggling with self-esteem issues. Daniel personally mentored several participants, finding immense satisfaction in guiding them through challenges he knew all too well. One of the first recipients, a bright but shy girl named Maya, reminded him of himself at her age. Maya had a knack for technology but lacked the resources to pursue her passion. Through the foundation, she secured a scholarship to a prestigious university and later interned at a leading tech firm. Watching Maya and others thrive was a source of pride for Daniel, but it also brought him unexpected joy. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of balance between his professional achievements and his personal fulfillment. Yet, life wasn't without its trials. Daniel's father, now in his late 60s, began to experience health issues. The once vibrant man who had worked tirelessly to provide for his family now needed support himself. Daniel moved him into a comfortable home near his own, ensuring he had access to the best medical care. Their relationship deepened during this time, with Daniel often sitting by his father's side, sharing stories of his work and the impact of the foundation. His father, ever the stoic, rarely showed emotion, but Daniel could see the pride in his eyes. "You've done good, son," his father said one evening, his voice raspier than usual. "Better than I ever could have imagined. Your mother would have been proud too." Those words stayed with Daniel, fueling his determination to continue making a difference. But as much as Daniel focused on others, he also realized the importance of nurturing his own life. He reconnected with Sarah, the kind-hearted teacher from the reunion, and they began spending more time together. Their conversations, filled with laughter and shared memories, gradually turned into something deeper. Sarah's unwavering belief in Daniel reminded him of his own resilience, and her warmth brought a light into his life that he hadn't realized was missing. Their relationship blossomed, and with Sarah's encouragement, Daniel started taking moments to enjoy life outside of work. They traveled together, explored new hobbies, and found joy in the simplicity of shared experiences. One particularly memorable evening, they attended a small dinner hosted by Maya and a group of other young professionals who had benefited from the foundation. Listening to their stories of triumph and growth, Daniel felt a profound sense of purpose. These were the moments that mattered, the lives changed, the dreams realized, and the ripple effect of hope spreading further than he'd ever imagined. As the night wound down, Maya approached Daniel with a shy but determined expression. "I just wanted to thank you," she said. "Not just for the opportunities but for believing in me when no one else did. You changed my life." Her words brought a lump to Daniel's throat. He had come so far from the boy who had once been mocked and dismissed. And now, he was helping others find the strength to rise above their own challenges. As he stood there, surrounded by people whose lives he had touched, Daniel realized that his journey was no longer just about proving himself. It was about creating a legacy of kindness, resilience, and opportunity. And in doing so, he had found something far greater than success. He had found meaning. Daniel looked at Sarah, who smiled at him from across the room, and then back at Maya. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for reminding me why I started this journey in the first place." And in that moment, Daniel felt at peace. His past no longer held power over him. It had become a stepping stone to a future filled with endless possibilities. The launch of the Rising Star Initiative had been a turning point for Daniel, but as the years passed, it became more than just a charitable endeavor. It evolved into a movement that reshaped communities and inspired countless individuals. Daniel's foundation grew rapidly, with chapters opening in cities across the country, each tailored to address the specific needs of the local youth. Yet, even as his influence expanded, Daniel remained deeply connected to the roots of his mission. One summer evening, Daniel found himself invited to speak at a gathering in his hometown. The event was being held in the very same school where his story had begun, a place that had once symbolized hardship but now represented triumph and transformation. Walking through the hallways, Daniel couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. The cracked walls and faded posters were still there, but the atmosphere was different. The school had changed. There was a sense of hope that hadn't existed in his time. The auditorium was packed that night, filled with students, teachers, parents, and community members. As Daniel took the stage, the applause was deafening, but it wasn't the adoration that struck him, it was the faces in the crowd. Among them were young kids, eyes wide with curiosity and possibility, and older individuals, some of whom he recognized from his school days. Even Jason was there, sitting near the back, his expression one of quiet respect. Daniel began his speech with a story, not about his success, but about the moment he had felt most defeated. He described a day when the weight of ridicule had nearly crushed him, how he'd stood in that very school and questioned his worth. "I thought my future had already been decided," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But life has a way of surprising us, especially when we refuse to give up." He shared lessons he had learned along the way, the power of resilience, the importance of asking for help, and the incredible strength that comes from turning pain into purpose. As he spoke, the room seemed to hang on every word, the air thick with inspiration and reflection. After his speech, Daniel stayed to meet with attendees. A line quickly formed, each person eager to share their story or express their gratitude. One young boy, barely 10 years old, approached him nervously. "Mr. Daniel," he said, clutching a small notebook, "I want to be like you someday. I want to help people too." Daniel crouched down to the boy's level, his heart swelling with pride. "You already have everything you need to do that," he said. "Never let anyone tell you otherwise. And if you ever need someone to remind you of that, you know where to find me." As the boy beamed and ran back to his parents, Daniel felt a familiar hand on his shoulder. Turning, he saw Sarah, her smile as radiant as ever. Over the years, their relationship had deepened into a partnership that was as steady as it was joyful. She had become not just his confidant but also a vital part of the Rising Star Initiative, helping to design programs that reached even more children. "I'm proud of you," she said softly, her eyes glistening. Daniel took her hand, squeezing it gently. "I couldn't have done this without you." The following day, Daniel visited the old neighborhood where he had grown up. The house he had once shared with his parents was gone, replaced by a row of newer, more modern homes. It was a strange feeling, seeing the landscape of his childhood altered, but it also filled him with hope. Change was possible, and the evidence was all around him. As he walked through the streets, he encountered Mrs. Jacobs, his former neighbor who had always slipped him extra bread when his family was struggling. Now in her 80s, she greeted him warmly, her memory sharp as ever. "Daniel," she said, her voice trembling with age but filled with pride, "I knew you'd make something of yourself. You always had that spark, even when you didn't see it." They talked for hours, reminiscing about the old days and catching up on the present. Before he left, Daniel made a promise to ensure she was cared for, just as she had cared for him in her own way all those years ago. The trip to his hometown left Daniel feeling reinvigorated. It reminded him why he had started his journey and how far he had come, not just in terms of wealth or success, but in his ability to influence lives. Yet, it also rekindled his desire to keep going. There was still so much to do, so many lives to touch, and Daniel knew he was far from finished. Back in the city, Daniel continued to pour his energy into expanding the Rising Star Initiative. He collaborated with other organizations, partnered with schools, and even began advocating for policy changes to improve access to education and resources for underserved communities. His efforts attracted national attention, and he was soon invited to speak at conferences and events around the world. Despite his busy schedule, Daniel always made time for the people who mattered most, his father, Sarah, and the young individuals whose lives he was helping to shape. He remained grounded, refusing to let his success distance him from the values that had guided him from the beginning. Years later, as he stood on the stage of a prestigious award ceremony, being recognized for his contributions to society, Daniel felt a wave of gratitude wash over him. The journey had been long and often difficult, but it had also been profoundly rewarding. When it was his turn to speak, Daniel addressed the crowd with humility. "This isn't just my award," he said. "It belongs to every teacher who believed in their students, every mentor who gave their time, and every person who dared to dream despite the odds. We all have the power to create change, and it starts with believing in the potential of others, and in ourselves." As the audience rose to their feet in applause, Daniel looked out at the sea of faces and felt a deep sense of peace. The boy who had once been humiliated and underestimated had not only risen above his circumstances but had also helped others do the same. His journey wasn't just a story of personal triumph, it was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of compassion. And in that moment, Daniel knew he had achieved something far greater than success. He had created a legacy that would endure for generations to come.